This episode of the Creep Street Podcast is brought to you by Martini Coffee Roasters. You know, people always look at me weird when I say I start off every morning with a big old martini. But then I set them straight, and I tell them I'm talking about Martini Coffee Roasters coffee. A delicious coffee made by the Martini family. They roast their coffee using a traditional method of sight and sound to roast those little babies to perfection. And they also sell green coffee beans for those home roasters out there. And right now, fans of the Creep Street Podcast can get 20% off their entire order by using the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Once again, for 20% off your order, use the code CREEPSTREET at martinicoffee.com. Martini Coffee Roasters, the perfect coffee to keep you creeps caffeinated.
You've taken a wrong turn down Creep Street.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
And you have arrived at a very special surprise episode of the Creep Street Podcast.
Yes, we love to just give you a little extra whenever we can. And you know what, the holiday season, is there a better time?
I mean, goodness gracious, do we have some stuffed stockings today?
Oh, yeah.
We had the wonderful opportunity, we were very thrilled to be able to sit down and interview YouTuber Zack Cherry. Zack Cherry is a horror YouTuber focusing on horror movies. His specialty happens to be the Scream franchise, and as you longtime listeners will know, hardly an episode goes by, even though we are talking about hauntings, UFO encounters, all that stuff, where we do not mention the Scream franchise.
It comes up a lot. Just horror movies in general, but of course, specifically Scream.
Yes, you can find him on YouTube at Zack Cherry. That is Zack with a K, Z-A-C-K, Cherry. And, of course, his second YouTube channel, The Cherry Picker, which is a podcast he does with Edward of Eddie is Truth. What a wonderful show. Maureen and I are such huge fans of both Zack Cherry's solo YouTube channel and The Cherry Picker podcast. We are Patreon supporters as well.
Yeah, we highly suggest you go ahead and check them out.
Zack Cherry dives in and analyzes some of your favorite horror franchises. I would call him absolutely an expert on the subject, especially when it comes to films like the Scream franchise, the Child's Play franchise. Please go check out his work. And without further ado, let's go ahead and listen to this interview with Zack Cherry. Hello, Creep Street. We are so honored today to have with us YouTube sensation, Mr. Zack Cherry. Zack Cherry is a horror movie YouTuber specifically with a focus on franchises like Scream, Halloween, Friday the 13th. Maureen and I are such huge fans of his, and of also not just his YouTube channel, but also the Cherry Picker podcast.
We love the pod.
That he does with Eddie from Edward is Truth. We're huge fans, and we are so thrilled to have him on the show today. Zack Cherry, thank you so much for coming on the Creep Street Podcast.
Well, thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Maureen. Happy to be here.
Of course. Oh my gosh, yes, thank you. Thank you. So polite. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Zack, let's just start with a question I'm sure you've been asked 1,000 times, but what was your horror awakening? Around what age were you? What was the film that did it?
I don't know if it was a film in particular, but I remember distinctly being really into Are You Afraid of the Dark when I was very young.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And then from there, that came first, and then there was Goosebumps. So the shows based off of the R.L. Stine paperbacks. So that was really kind of like the gateway into horror in the 90s. And I was always terrified of, there was one Are You Afraid of the Dark episode in particular, not the one with Nev Campbell. There was like a ghost girl who was inside of a mirror, in an abandoned house.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and she would write "help me" or something but it would all be mirrored on the backwards on the wall and then show up in the mirror in the right way. That always freaked me out. That was kind of like the first thing, and it got to become almost like an obsession where just like I didn't like to be scared, but I wanted to, and then it just went down a rabbit hole. And now like nothing really scares me. But in terms of movies, I remember seeing things that I probably wasn't supposed to watch. Like if I was being looked after by my sister or one of my stepbrothers, and we would, or even like friends of like my parents who had kids, and they would watch horror movies, and I would just be with them. And so there was a few like really odd movie entries that I would see. One in particular was Witchboard 2. Devil's Doorway, something like that. That might have been like the first actual horror movie I saw. I also remember seeing Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight.
Oh, very nice.
So those were
Gotta
like,
love Billy Zane.
Yeah, Billy Zane. So those were like probably my earliest memories, and then it segued into Scream. And from there, just like that Scream kind of like opened the door to Halloween and Friday the 13th and everything else under the sun.
Now, obviously, the Scream franchise has clearly played an important role in not just your taste in film, but when you watch your content, really an important role in your life. How did Scream come into your life, and what was it about it that just hit with you?
I mean, well, like I said, Scream was there from very early on. I actually remember that I think it was my 12th birthday party. It would have been in the interim between Scream and Scream 2 that I was having my birthday party, just having friends over, and I was at the video store with my mom, just trying to find something to watch for us. And she actually was just like, oh, I've heard a lot about this, and picked out Scream.
Nice.
So it's all her fault. And
yeah, we'll blame her. Yeah,
totally. And yeah, that was kind of like that opened up the gates. And from there, just because like at that time, like just because Scream was so live, Scream 2 came out, followed by Scream 3 a little bit after that. But at that point, I'd already become so enraptured by the genre. And then I kind of fell off of horror movies for a while. Because, I mean, Scream, between 3 and 4, there was no sequels for 11 years there. And I wasn't really loving where the genre had been going anyway in that era of like the 2000s. And it wasn't until like probably like the mid to late 2010s that, you know, I started watching things again because horror was getting better. Totally. So I was kind of back on a bandwagon, and I went and revisited the Scream movies because I'd seen them many times, but not to the extent that I do now. And when the news came that there was going to be a Scream 5, that kind of catapulted the Scream for me. And I at that point, I was kind of starting a YouTube channel, and I didn't really have a direction as to what it was going to be. So I would just like do random things. In particular, I covered some news about Scream 5 at the time. I don't really do like cover news stories about things anymore, or at least I haven't for years. But that was kind of the thing that like catapulted me at first, or not catapulted, but it gained traction. So I just kind of kept going with it. And I don't think that anyone else on YouTube at the time was talking about Scream 5. So it was good for me because I was trending for being the only person that was talking about it, and there were obviously like people interested in it. And then it kind of got saturated by a lot of people talking about it, but by that point I'd already kind of like moved into a more niche direction with my content, so that I felt was more beneficial for me anyway. So I didn't really cover it, but by that point I'd already sort of made I guess a name for myself of like talking about these movies and just revisiting them to the extent that I was at that time. I almost like became a self-taught expert. Like I don't feel comfortable calling myself an expert on Scream at all.
I would. You're an expert.
Thank you. But no, it definitely like I was happy to take that title. I was glad to be an authority on Scream, and it's just kind of gone from there.
Yeah, in fact, I would say, how we kind of discovered you, and I'm sure, it was probably maybe the same for a lot of people, was, of course, your Who Killed Who for the first Scream. And when I saw that video, when we saw it, I remember it was one of those things like we were already such huge fans of the Scream franchise, but it was one of those things where we had never, at least on my part, I had never stopped to think like, oh yeah, like logistically, there had to be one of the two behind that mask. Now, obviously in real life, we know that it was for the most part, it was a stunt professional, but the idea, theoretically, yes, there had to be one of them behind it. And when did that idea come to your head and how did you like map that out?
I think it came to me in all of those rewatches around that time, in like 2019, 2020, whenever I made those videos, because I just became like so engrossed in them all over again. I would listen to the commentaries and just kind of hearing Wes Craven's vision and his attention to detail, because he's very coy about a lot of things, but if you just listen to him, you could like read between the lines. He talks about things like was a magician, like, he was never going to reveal his tricks, but he liked to tease and tantalize the audience with, what is actually happening or what could be. And I don't know if I'd ever like specifically thought about it. Like, I'm sure that everyone at some point would have pondered like, well, who is that at that point or another? But again, it was one of those things that nobody was really talking about. There actually was maybe one or two videos, because at the time I did look on YouTube to see if there was anything like that, because just part of the whole YouTube process is to kind of see what else is out there and what might be popular, trending. And these were older videos, so clearly nobody had talked about it in a while. So I figured, okay, but before I even got to like Who Killed Who, the thing that was the most interesting to me was that opening scene, because like it's there's a reason why it's considered one of the greatest horror movie openings, and that's because of the attention to detail. And there were little things that I would notice, like when we first see Ghostface and he kind of flashes across the hallway there as Casey's looking down from the kitchen area, and you see that he's running to the front door, and then later when the parents come in, the door is open, but she locked the door. So there's just like little clues like that say, okay, well, like he must have opened the door to let the other one in. And if you listen, there's also like in the sound design, you can hear the front door opening in that moment.
Yes,
as well.
Such a great detail.
So it's just, I was kind of interested in how that entire scene, which is all in real time, played out. Like, where would the killers both be in relation to her in the middle of the house? Because I think that the way it was described, I don't remember if this was in the commentary, but Wes or Kevin just described Casey's situation as kind of being like inside this giant fishbowl, and everyone could see in, but she couldn't see out. Everything is pitch black outside, which, that gets your imagination running. Like, where are they? How are they watching her at this particular moment? So I kind of went in and just made this animation that took forever to do, but it was a lot of fun, and just sort of my perception of where things made the most logical sense. I didn't like map out like I tried to get the best understanding of the layout for the house. It wasn't 100% accurate. There's like a hub, like another section off of the kitchen, but like for the most part, it is how it's represented in the movie, or at least like the areas in which she's walking around. And that, I don't think that video like blew up or anything, at least right away, but it kind of inspired me to then look at the rest of the movie and just, okay, this is where they were in that scene. Who was behind the mask for each other murder after that? So I made that video, and then it did okay, but then I made Scream 2, and in doing so, that kind of like pushed the algorithm in my favor, and then all of a sudden, like my channel just blew up. And then I continued with 3 and 4, and then on from that. So it's always fun, and I love kind of like the fan feedback and appreciation. There's a lot of people who also hate me for it. Like there's like disagreements of just like there's like, you're telling lies and yada yada yada. I'm just just looking at the information very analytically. Like that's all I can do here. I'll even say this is not based on fact. This is just based on my perception of the information that we're given.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's so impressive. And do you feel like you're as good with detail in movies outside of horror as well as you are with horror? Like any other genre of movie, do you feel like you are able to really get in and get in deep there.
I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't watch a lot of movies outside of horror.
No, that's great.
Yeah, and it's not because of a lack of interest or anything like that. I get so much more out of horror movies. Like I have some of my favorite movies that are not horror that I'll still revisit, but I don't really go out of my way to take in new movies or even go back to like movies that maybe I missed from years gone by, unless it's horror, because I feel like horror just to me offers the most cinematically out of what I'm looking for. But I think for sure, like with Wes Craven, just compared to other directors, he's kind of operating, or was kind of operating on like a completely different level. Because like even like another director that I like admire, John Carpenter, I was just talking to a friend yesterday about him and just saying like, he's a great director, but he's not detail oriented. Like there's certain things that he does not really give a shit about. For instance, like in Halloween 1978, because the confusion that I've always had when Annie goes to her car and it's locked, so she goes back in and she's singing the song like no keys, and she walks back into the house and then she gets the keys, but then she comes back to the garage and she just opens the door without unlocking it. But then she's kind of caught off guard, but it's not very clear if she's caught off guard because she didn't have to unlock the door because the windows are all fogged up. But even in that regard, would she not have, at least if she knew that the door was locked, the first thing she would have done was like unlock it? So that to me is just kind of like John Carpenter not really being as stringent on continuity the way that, someone like Wes Craven was. And I definitely noticed like a lot of horror movies. It doesn't necessarily change the quality for me because there's a lot of suspension that we have to disbelieve to enjoy movies, especially horror. But I always find that if there is attention to detail, it makes movies a lot better, and there really isn't a lot of detail-oriented movies that are coming out right now.
Yeah, no, that is a really interesting point and a good point, and I understand that it's like a movie, like what you just said, like movies, a lot needs to happen, and most of them used to be and still are, but especially used to be filmed in California. But I, born and raised from Illinois, I was always like, why is no one wearing a coat? It's like, it's cold. It's cold on Halloween. So that's a detail I always thought of. But I understand why, it's better to not have to deal with coats. But
now, obviously, aside from Wes Craven, another vital ingredient in the Scream franchise is obviously Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter.
Right.
And there is, and you've talked about this in your videos, a great example you gave once was that year's difference between Halloween 6 in 1995 and Scream in 1996. In my opinion, and I try to like take into consideration the whole rose-colored glasses thing and, my own personal taste. But really it was revolutionary because, yes, like young, pretty people have always been common in horror, but there was something about Scream. Suddenly these young pretty people were also cool and really smart. And it wasn't just the screenplay, it was the casting choices, the soundtracks. The Faculty soundtrack, I still just put on all the time. Like, what was that special sauce? What do you think Kevin Williamson, and not even ones he wrote, but even just imitators?
Yeah.
What do you think that special sauce was that really kind of revolutionized horror in 96?
I mean, well, first, as a disclaimer, I love Halloween 6. I think that it is unfairly maligned. It's not a great script by any stretch of the imagination, and obviously it had its production problems. But besides that, early 90s horror, was like you said, it's just like it was not good. But the movies that were good were exceptional. Like some like Candyman, Silence of the Lambs, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I'd say Misery, but that's probably good, like 1990, going back a bit far. But like the genre was kind of like heading into a very, I'll say like self-reflexive territory, because like Candyman in a way, like just like with its references to like the urban legends of it all and sort of like becoming the legend in and of itself, and the way that Wes Craven's New Nightmare was kind of the reverse of Scream, just seeing the perspective just more so from like the people behind the cameras rather than the characters inside of the movies. So it definitely felt like there was like a little mini movement of just like a subgenre that was happening. I think that with Kevin Williamson, like he came up with like a really great idea with Scream, with his script that was very much just kind of like introduce these ideas that, okay, these characters could be self-aware and cool and understand things. And that definitely played a factor in kind of where it turned into the like WB, or I guess now like CW.
Yep. I was just thinking that.
Yeah, of just sort of like the way that these characters were written to then how the studios like Dimension Films would specifically cast the roles. Now, in terms of Kevin Williamson, this might be controversial because I do think that like Scream is such a brilliant script, but the final product and kind of where the franchise went, at least with the trilogy, and you could even include Scream 4 in there, that was all Wes Craven's vision. And I don't think that Kevin had ever written the script with Wes's vision in mind. Like that was very much like they came together and they were just like an excellent partnership. But I don't have the same reverence for, like I Know What You Did Last Summer that some people do with Scream, and they'll also consider I Know What You Did Last Summer to be right up there. I know that that's adapted from the novel, but there's, for like Kevin's career, like I haven't really seen anything that has kind of blown me away ever since Scream and Scream 2. Like the work that he did, like the Faculty, for instance, and H2O, like he came in and did rewrites or like script polishes on stories that had already existed. So they just kind of brought him in to do like the Dawson's Creek thing, or just make it like WB-esque, so that they could bring in these actors and have them go in there. But I was actually looking at his IMDb. He hasn't really done a lot of film. Like he's mostly done television over the years. And I mean, it's probably not fair for me to make that criticism of him, or just say that I haven't seen anything great from him, because I haven't actually sat down and watched his shows. Like I did see the first season of Vampire Diaries, and I know that was hugely popular, but it just was never something that was in my wheelhouse. But just in terms of like Cursed in 2005, and I'm just trying to remember like other things, because that was like his kind of reteaming with Wes Craven. Like it just, they really wanted to kind of capture that lightning in a bottle effect again, and I don't think that it had happened. Like Scream was such a specific moment in the genre that I don't know if, like, it certainly was influential like in those 5 years that you're speaking of, or at least like into the early 2000s. But I'm not sure if like where the genre eventually went, if it wouldn't have gotten there regardless, with or without Scream.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very interesting to think about. And another thing that I was thinking about is obviously like with the first three, they're commenting on tropes of horror, right? And it's this sort of self-aware but still scary, and with 4 too, I would say. What's interesting about 5 and 6, granted, it's a whole new crew and everything too, but 5 is really a commentary on requels, and 6 is kind of a commentary on just like franchises, which really aren't necessarily specific to horror. That's just more of a cinema in general thing. Yeah. Right now we're in the era of what they call elevated horror, films like The Witch and The Babadook, which we also love.
And it's talked about in Scream 5.
Yes, absolutely. I've always was interested in why they didn't choose to sort of play on the trope of elevated horror, which I think you could do with Scream. I think it would be more of a matter of cinematography, pacing, and tone. It wouldn't have to obviously be set like in colonial New England or something like that, like The Witch. But do you think that was the right move to sort of comment on things outside of the horror genre?
I mean, not necessarily, because Scream 3 was about horror trilogies, as they said, but it like mostly came down to trilogies. And I really like Scream 5. Scream 6, I have made no secret that I think is not a good movie at all. The thing with like Scream 5, it's like, because there's not a lot of difference between the ideas between Scream 4 of like the remakes versus the requels in Scream 5. Each movie is kind of like a different side of the same coin in a way, and I think because of that, like a lot of the things that are really good about Scream 4 are the failures of Scream 5, and vice versa, of the things that are good with Scream 5. And the way that I've kind of looked at the franchises or the movies in the franchise is that each movie kind of like there's like the general theme of kind of like the original Scream is just sort of like the about horror movies. Scream 2, horror sequels, 3 trilogies, 4 remakes, and so on. But there's also, and this is what Wes Craven infused into the movies, is that there's kind of a sub-theme or just something that actually is more intrinsic to the story that he's telling that adds a lot more depth and nuance to what's happening. And for instance, I think that Scream 2 is much more a story about fame, because if you look at all the key characters, each one is kind of affected by it in their own specific way. Scream 3 is kind of more about this like Hollywood Me Too movement way before it was a thing.
Right.
Scream 4 is like this advent of social media. And Scream 5 had this like a really good sub-theme of toxic fandom. And I don't think that they explored it to the best of their abilities, because if they had, I think that the killers would have been a lot more fleshed out, a lot more interesting. We would have kind of understood their motive a little bit more, because as it is, it's just kind of like the idea of like the toxic fandoms is just sort of brought up loosely in the conversation when they're at Mindy's house, and then when the killers revealed their thing at the end. But we didn't really see them kind of go into it. Like, I would have loved to see Amber and Richie kind of argue with one another over what the best Stab sequel was, or just like to actually be more true to what actual fandoms are like. And then in terms of 6, I'll just say, because I mean, like, to call Scream 6 about franchises just felt so, like, Scream has been a franchise since Scream 2.
Right.
So just like all of a sudden we're in a franchise does not make sense. But they did have this kind of, if they had a sub-theme of that movie, it was the idea of cancel culture. And again, the writers and the directors just did not hone in on that to a place that would actually like enrich in the story that they were telling or the characters within it. And that's what I think is the component that, for me at least, makes the last 2 entries not as strong as the first 4.
I do agree there for sure. Yeah, that was such a good way to put it about the differences that you were noticing there, like the sub themes, because it is so easy to just think about what is overtly said by the killers at the end, but it's like there's so much more that goes into it, especially when Wes Craven isn't there and it's not as good.
Yeah, right. And to their credit, like they were doing the best to what they thought that like this should be, and
totally.
and it looks, I mean, like aesthetically, like these movies look like Scream movies. I just feel like they're lacking the DNA that Wes Craven had brought to the table, and I mean, he left very big shoes to fill. Like it would be hard for anyone to kind of come in there and just be like, how do we continue this franchise?
And I've always thought the biggest missed opportunity with 5, at least for me, is obviously there's, they return to the Mocker house from the first one. I always thought that last shot as the camera pulls out and you see the house and the ambulances and police are arriving. And I always thought it would have been a great last moment with that final shot to actually reveal that they were in Stu Macher's house the whole time.
I mean, well, they kind of they did that sort of like with the reveal when Sydney calls Sam, and then she she looks around. I think that the problem comes down to the marketing, because they spoiled that in the trailers, and it was like heavily shown in the production, like beforehand, like on Instagram. There were photos showing that they had made the set again. So I think that if they had done a better job, just keeping things under wraps during production, and then maybe like during the house scene, because they kind of tried to hide the house, but they didn't. I thought you were going to say that like the thing that would have made it better is if they had actually gone back to California and shot the movie in the actual house, because that I absolutely agree would have been better. There's something about the climax of 5 that does feel very soundstagey to me.
Kevin Williamson, recently, I think it was like a year ago, he was doing a interview with Collider, and they asked him, do you think Scream, is it something that could just continue on forever? Because it does adapt to the modern zeitgeist. And he said, there was a time when I didn't think so, but now I think they can. Now, obviously, if it's making money, they'll keep making them regardless. But from a substantive standpoint, from an artistic standpoint, do you think Scream has the legs to be just something that can keep going and keep reinventing itself?
Yes and no. I think that it's definitely something that, just based on the things that we had talked about, just like whether it's like the theme underneath everything or just kind of what the subtext is of it, there definitely needs to be something about it that justifies its existence. And I think that like Scream 5 definitely had that, like just with the idea of these things being rebooted and the idea of the fans. And I walked away from that movie, you know, very happy, very satisfied. I thought that the ending for 4 always left me feeling like there needed to be more. I just didn't know how they could possibly do any more because they left the characters in such a stalemate almost, which is the way that movie ended.
Well, I always loved your comment about 4 is the one where Sydney's making tea the whole time.
Yes.
That's the funniest. There's so many shots of her just dipping that tea bag while everyone around her is getting killed. You're right. There is like a, in a way, almost like this live, laugh, love kind of Sydney. What would you say is your favorite Sydney? Where do you think Sydney is at her best?
I mean, I think she peaked in 3. I think the build up to that was definitely the best. I don't think that she's bad in 4. I just think that like her arc kind of lacked a sense of agency that I think does, even though she's not in 5 a whole lot, when she does show up, you kind of feel it, you're there with her. But with 4, it always felt like it was a minor inconvenience for these people. Like they started the movie and ended the movie the exact same people that they were, whereas every other movie, they went through some sort of transformation. I think that for Sydney, 3 was definitely her biggest transformation.
Do you think that, and I know we had just said earlier that we all don't really think 6 is the best one and we don't love it, but do you think Sydney not being in it is part of one of the reasons why the movie didn't work as well? Or do you think that it could have worked without Sydney being in it?
I think it totally could have been successful without her. And that's not to say that I don't think that she ever needs to like come back into these movies again. Like this, as far as I'm concerned, like she is the main character of this franchise. But there's a difference between her and Gale, where Sydney has been shown to, you know, in the past kind of run away from something, or she'll face it when she has to. But Gale has been a character that's always kind of gone to wherever the murders are happening. Or I guess you could say that the murderers have always come to Sydney and Gale has always gone to the murderers. Okay. So it just, there's, it would get to a point where it's just like, how does this keep happening to Sydney? How does she keep getting thrust into these situations that I would rather they kind of give her a break? I mean, I obviously always wish Neve Campbell the absolute best in her career. I want her to have parts and make money and just grow in her career. But in terms of the character, I don't need to see her all the time. And I feel that, especially with where they were going, or where it seemed like they might have been going with the new characters, was that they were going to focus on them. And I just don't think that they made the best of how they did that. And then you had characters like Gale kind of shoehorned in there, and Kirby in a way too, just shoehorned into the story, that it felt like there was way too many cooks in the kitchen, or just like there's way too many characters where nobody was really getting the best possible version of their story that they could have.
Something that was, for some people, controversial about 5 was the death of Dewey. And maybe there's some merit to that, but I think that moment when they're getting in the elevator and he goes back and they're like, "Go, who cares?" And he's like, "I do." And he has this moment, it's almost like out of a Western.
Yeah.
He's walking towards the unconscious ghost face. He's emptying the empty shells and he's reloading. Suddenly in that moment, everything Dewey wanted to be in those first 4 films, where he wasn't taken seriously, he was seen as kind of a goofball, but he wanted to be this, like, suddenly he is that heroic, stoic character that he always wanted to be. And I think there's beauty in that. What do you think about the death of Dewey?
I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think the problem that I have with it is that it did feel very telegraphed in a way. The way that I've heard the writers kind of discuss killing him off is that they started the project and they said, well, one of them's got to die and it has to be Dewey. And I agree that it has to be Dewey because he's sort of the glue that holds Sydney and Gale together. Like if Gale was to die, that would be a huge loss for Dewey, and not to say that it wouldn't be a loss for Sydney, but it wouldn't change her life in a dramatic way. And same thing for Gale if Sydney died. Whereas if Dewey died, here's 2 characters that don't really have a lot in common. Like, they've worked together, they've had their issues, but his death would strengthen their characters absolutely, which is why I felt like there was a lot of setup for things going into Scream 6 that didn't really pan out with Gail as a character. It wasn't so much that she just kind of backtracked on her word entirely. It's just that they almost took away everything about her and kind of made her less smart in the process as well.
For sure.
But with Dewey in particular, just because that was the mindset that they went into it with, it did feel very telegraphed. It did feel that the way that it was shot and set up was a little perfunctory in a way, that it wasn't the best send off for the character. Like I think of like Randy's death in Scream 2, that was set up to be a very shocking moment. And here it didn't really have the shock value, and more so just was an emotionally distressing thing that happened in the middle of the movie. But just because you can do something and they haven't in the past, they haven't taken the risks, doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And I feel that even though I agree with what you're saying of just sort of like his progression throughout the franchise at that point, it was kind of necessary for him. It didn't really feel like it served a greater purpose other than just kind of getting Sydney to come back into town. And even Nev Campbell and I believe Courtney said to the writers and the directors, like, you might want to just try filming this two ways, just one where he doesn't die, because that's what Wes Craven would always do, because Wes, wanted to just have like the options available just in case, because Dewey was supposed to die in the first movie. And this does come back to Kevin Williamson, because Kevin Williamson kind of does have a little bit of bloodlust for his characters. Like, he wanted to kill off Sydney and 4. There was always just like characters that would meet their demise, and Wes would look at it and just be like, his instincts would tell him, this, we can get a little bit more mileage out of this character. We should hold off for a bit there. So that was kind of like his rewriting of certain things that Kevin had set up in a way here. And I think that had the new writers and directors maybe heeded that advice or just like taken things into consideration, they might have had an opportunity to not kill Dewey in 5, or at least try to develop an idea that was what I think might have been a better send-off for him, or at least some storyline that could work for him into 6. Because as it is, with them just being so stubborn and being like, no, he's got to die, bottom line, I think that they kind of shot themselves in the foot there.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was just frustrating for me watching that part, because there was no, in my opinion, there was no real reason why he needed to go shoot Ghostface in the head. Like, I understand, like, I get it, like, it's, the whole thing where it's like, the headshot, but it's like, in that moment, it was just not necessary. I don't know, it just didn't seem like something Dewey would do to me, but I don't know.
Now, there's another moment in Scream 4. I've always wanted to talk to you about this, because I know you and Eddie have talked about this, and you have differing opinions about that glance between Dewey and Nev when they're sitting on the couch and they're kind of reminiscing. And Eddie kind of took it as, was this a hint at some sort of a romance? And you did not think so. And it is an interesting moment when you rewatch it. It is an interesting moment. I mean, I guess you could say they pause and look at each other just because they know and they understand this mutual trauma that they've both experienced. Yeah. If not romance, what do you think that glance meant?
I mean, well, I will say of Eddie, a reoccurring joke that we have is that he'll watch a movie and he'll just assume that any straight couple is romantically involved, whether it's stated or not. But with that in particular, the way that I've always read that relationship between Sydney and Dewey is that he is the surrogate older brother and she is the surrogate younger sister. Like, she replaced Tatum after she was killed. This, it was like the closest bond that he still had to his dead sister. And this was just someone from her past, from her life in Woodsboro, who was, like, besides her father, the only person who was really kind of an emotional rock for her. And I never got any sort of romantic vibes at all. What I saw from that situation is like, here's two people that had kind of probably been estranged for a while, because in Scream 4 it's sort of established that Sydney has not been back in Woodsboro for a very long time. At least, I mean, according to the deleted scenes, the last time she was there was when her father died for the funeral. And we just know from like little things in Scream 3 that like Sydney had on her speed dial only like 2 people. One was her father and one was Dewey. So just automatically here's the most important person in her life. We don't really get very much information about Sydney's personal life in Scream 4. We don't know if she's seeing anyone or anything. Like, if we're to take at face value that she's married to Mark Kincaid from Scream 3, in what she says in Scream 5, who knows what the relationship was outside of what we see in the movie at that point. But I just get like two old acquaintances, not even acquaintances, just like two people who are very important to one another, seeing each other for the first time and just genuinely caring about each other. And that's it. And also realizing that I'm really happy to see you, but the circumstances in which I'm seeing you right now are not ideal, and we need to be serious about this.
Yeah, now that you put it that way, that makes so much sense, and I do agree, because how I thought about it before was I was like, that does seem like a romantic moment, but I don't think it's supposed to be. But then it's like, I don't think that would just be a mistake. Like, that's a pretty big thing. So I think you're right. I think you're completely right, and it's just we are perverts. And also, I also think you're just not used to seeing just like a man and a woman on stage, Jesus Christ, on screen together, just the two of them looking at each other and not talking without it being romantic. So I think you just, but I don't know.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate for both sides, I mean, I can see a possibility because, obviously Wes Craven wanted to make this movie with the mindset that there was going to be a 5 and 6 following shortly thereafter, which obviously never happened. So maybe it was the planting of a seed of something. I just never seen it that way. And since 4 was kind of the end of that, it kind of wiped out any chance that could happen anyway. I get more out of more nuance out of Sydney and Gail's relationship in Scream 4 than either of theirs with Dewey. But that's like a whole other story.
A question I want to ask, Zach, is if you had to go down at the hands of any ghost face, who would it be?
Whoa.
Oh, wow.
This is serious.
If I was to be murdered by one of them.
If you had, I know, what a weird question.
How do you want to get murdered?
Who would it be? Of the 12, I think now? I can't remember how many.
Well, it would be nobody that has been in any movies that have come out recently. I can tell you that. I mean, probably like a Mrs. Loomis.
I was going to say the same.
Loomis. Yeah, Mrs. Loomis.
Yeah. She's got that intensity.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be over pretty fast.
Obviously in your videos, you've said your personal favorite ghost face was Mickey. What is it about Mickey that for you is just so unique and special among the other ghost faces?
I think it's because a lot of people say like, well, he's obvious, he's not in the movie very often. And this is actually something that Wes Craven does speak to in the commentary, where he says that the basis for Mickey was actually Iago from Othello. And I haven't heard him speak to any of the other killers, at least in his era, as any sort of like great like literary character in that regard, as just like a villainous character. And like when you think about it, like Mickey is there from the start, just like planting these seeds, just trying to gaslight everyone and make them doubt each other. And he, in his own way there at the end, when he sort of is playing that mind game of just like, should Sydney trust Derek in that moment? And he gets under her skin to the point where like he has her doubting everything that she knows. And you could argue that everything that happens after Scream 2, just in terms of where she goes off in her life and isolates herself, is an effect of what Mickey had done, because Mickey represents that unknown factor of just like the killer could be anybody and get into my life in any way possible. Whereas like, Billy and Stu and Mrs. Loomis, like those are people that she had known for years. And I think that the way that Sydney handled them as well was very much like in a way that like she knew them, so she knew how to manipulate them and get the upper hand on them, which we saw in both of those movies. She didn't really get a chance to, like, she got scrappy with Mickey, and they definitely both like held their own in that, but it was ultimately Mrs. Loomis who, at least the first shot or the first blood drawn was by her, and then it wasn't until Mickey just like, got that wonderful moment where he just spins up and they start shooting at him that they finally put him down. But it also comes down to, I guess, like the ridiculousness of his motive, because it's very much, it does like I had mentioned of just like this theme of fame kind of delve into that. Like it's similar to like Jill in a way that like she wants to be famous in her own unique way. He wanted to get famous by like becoming this scandal almost, or just like this courtroom trial thing, like O.J. Simpson, which was very much like at the forefront of the news and media at the time. So he's just, you know, he had very lofty ambitions, and I think that the performance by Timothy Olyphant was just incredible. I mean, I think that most of the actors, you know, who played Ghostface do give a very good performance, but there's just something in the way that he does it, and I think like he probably has my favorite quotes of just any of the killers that monologues to her. So that's kind of why he's my favorite.
And something else you pointed out about him, which I think makes him unique, is he also seems to genuinely like the people he's killing, which is interesting. Whereas Billy, Mrs. Loomis, Roman, for many of them, they have this grudge, or there's this hatred or this anger. For him, it's almost, he actually does seem to kind of like the people that he's killing.
Yeah, he's definitely presented as this killer for hire, and is shown in that. Like if the situation was different, if he was not hired to do this, he could probably very well be like a Dexter Morgan type character who just like lives his life and it's just like, I'm friends with all these people, and like, you know, like, or just like at least in his head what that version of friendship or human connection would be while he's, you know, off murdering other people. But it's it definitely, you know, there isn't any malice in it that I get out of it. It's just more so, it's just the fun of it for him, and just like, this is something that I'm doing, and it's working towards a goal, and I don't know that if he's regrets any of it, but it's just sort of like, I think in his mind he can like these people and murder them at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, you know, we've seen all sorts of combinations of killers. We've seen a solo killer, of course, we've seen doubles a few times, now even most recently a triple. Something I've always thought would be a cool idea, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's said this too, and it's an idea I want, and feel free to shoot this idea down. I feel like this is my elevator pitch to Zack Cherry.
And no one is making it.
Yes, absolutely.
None of us are going to make it, so this is cool.
I've always thought it would be cool to do two killers, but two killers that are acting independently of each other and don't know who the other is.
Yeah, and actually, like, if I was to write Scream 7, or, you know, if I was given the task to do that it would be exactly what I would do. I think that there should always be two killers. And really, like, the problem with 6, because I don't count Jason, and I think that was that was a huge missed opportunity to have this idea of like the killers working independently, but then just kind of throw it away for an opening scene gimmick. But I think the what happens when you have more than two, like we see at the end of Scream 6, it's just that they kind of get lost in the shuffle, and they're very underdeveloped in a way. They don't get enough screen time, and there's just one who's just a little bit more prominent. But even at that same time, like, you're missing a lot from all three of them. If there's one, I don't mind it. Like, I don't think that they should ever do that again. I think that that was, you know, good for Scream 3, because it was a bit of a surprise the first time I saw it, because I was like waiting, like, where's the other killer, and just to see that, okay, he did it all on his own. But with 2, there's a lot of fun that can be had, and I think that I don't know how well this would work with the concept of 2 killers working independently, but I think that just with the idea that we always know that there's more than one killer, they could have done things where we see 2 killers on the screen together much earlier in the movie, not just like what we see at the end of Scream 6 when they stab Chad in the concession area there. And one thing that we actually talked about when we were doing a podcast on Scream 4 that would have, I think, enhanced the opening of Scream 4 is if when the girl was crawling out from under the garage and the one Ghostface was there before they like pushed the button to put the garage down, if she crawled out and then looked up and there was a second Ghostface in front of her who had a video camera recording it, and then they just put the garage down and then finished that scene off. And right then and there, that already establishes, okay, there's 2 of them. We don't know which combination of people it is, and we also see that they're filming them, and that just that already adds to the intrigue of the whole idea of them filming the murders. So, you know, it's just little tidbits like that could definitely make things better. But I think at this point, I don't know how much life the Scream franchise has left in it to, like, you know, keep making movies that are of good quality, or at least telling stories that feel original. But in terms of the killers, I agree with you. That's the only way that I could see it going, is if there's two killers, or potentially if there is one killer and then a second character comes along and takes advantage of that and then becomes a killer and kind of takes their place in the midst of everything, still working independently of them, but just to sort of like throw things off. Maybe they kill them and then pick up afterwards, or they capture them and then hold them hostage, like we see it with someone at the end of each movie, and then at least there's an opportunity for them to monologue and explain what was actually happening, because that could get very confusing. But I don't think that confusion is necessarily bad, as long as they're going to be innovative and explain it in a way that is intriguing and ties everything together.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense, and those are really great ideas. And I actually thought that too when we were seeing 6. At some point I was like, oh, because I am so bad. I like to think that I'm, like a somewhat smart person, and I like movies a lot, but I am so bad at guessing the endings of movies for whatever reason. I never know what's going to happen. So I thought that was maybe going to be what was happening, that it was multiple people, 2 or more, that just didn't know that they were, acting with each other. So I just think that's so interesting. And going off of that, I know we just got a lot of your ideas already, but which is great, which is going to be my next question. Let's say they don't do Screen 7 right now. It's scratched for now, or scratched? No, it's scrapped.
Shelved, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Put on the shelf.
Oh my God. Who am I? Do you think there would be a chance again in 10 years or something like that to kind of start again with a new trilogy? It would still be considered Scream 7 or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. Do you think that would even happen, or do you think that's a good idea, or do you think it's just we need to let her go?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I haven't been thinking about Scream a whole lot, which is ironic just with how controversial it is right now. But there's something bittersweet about what's happening here, because I really would have liked to see a proper conclusion to the Carpenter sisters storyline. I would have liked to see the mother come back into the fold. I think that she's a very, just based on who she is and her connection to Billy Loomis from the past, that already makes her so much more interesting to me than the Kirsches or, Liv in Scream 5, or just these minor characters that are just show up to get killed. Even Leslie Mock, or these characters who have ties to people from the past who've actually interacted with them and met them and know them, rather than people who are just related by blood, who don't really know what's going on. They just have their kind of based on what they've seen in the movies. So I think that there were so many endless possibilities of what could have happened, because if that was the case, 6 would have felt very much like a transition movie into them, because they do mention the mother, but I would have really wanted to see something come to fruition with all of that happening, and to actually develop a story with the characters that meant something, and delve deeper into them than just kind of these shallow moments of just you have to let me go, and that kind of playing out more just in literal sense of just letting her sister go from the balcony.
Right.
I would actually like to see these characters explore their relationships. I would have liked to see Sam be interested in Billy and want to find out more about him, just with all of this shit that's going on with her, and just how she put on the costume at the end of 6 and obviously tapped into some sort of killer instinct that she had that's going to if she started the movie off in therapy, just imagine what's going to happen next. So, a lot of people have said this is the ending feels very much like an ending for them anyway, because she drops the mask. I feel it's very confusing. It leaves a lot more questions unanswered than answered. And I would have liked to have seen her have a conversation with her mother and just have tried to understand something about her father. And I think that Christina Carpenter would have made an excellent red herring. I don't know if I would necessarily want to see her as a killer. But on the flip side of that, just because I haven't been so enthused about how they've been handling this new generation of cast, there's just something so vapid to me about the core 4, and just sort of it's just a positive, happy-go-lucky team. We're survivors, and because we say so, not because of any trauma, and they're almost like laughing in the face of it, just haha, we're good, and we've been stabbed a million times, but we're still standing.
Chad is essentially Swiss cheese at this point. I mean, he's got so many knife holes in him. I don't know how.
Speaking of continuity, it grates on me so bad that he's in that party scene at the beginning, the costume party scene, and he's got his shirt off. I'm not mad about that, but I'm mad at the fact that they didn't even think to like give him scars at all, and where like they had the mindset to give Tara a scar on her hand that we see in the movie, but like with Chad, there's just like the entire side of his body was stabbed in part 5. That it just like things like that just like. That is an egregious continuity error. But as I was gonna say, like if that is the end of these characters at the end of 6, I don't know if I'd necessarily be upset. I would rather they focus on characters that, you know, whether it is Sydney and Gale coming back, or this rumor that Mark Kincaid Patrick Dempsey is going to come back as well, like these pre-existing relationships and just character history. That could be something interesting. But at the same time, with the people who are attached to these movies, I'm just not wowed by the writing that they've come up with, and just knowing that they're doing 7 if and when that does happen. And also Christopher Landon directing. Not that I have anything against him. Like I enjoy his ilk of horror movies. Like I think like he's kind of tapped into like the fun kind of horror movies. And to me, like Scream is fun, but it's not like bubblegum pop, like candy wrapper fun. I don't think that he has the gravitas to put together a Scream movie, or just like the vision to put it together without it being kind of like this hokey comedic sort of thing. And there was already kind of shades of that in Scream 6 that I'm kind of hoping for a complete overhaul. And if that means that we don't get a Scream movie for a couple of years, I'm not terribly concerned about that.
Very well put. It's just, I don't know. I feel like it would be jumping through so many hoops at the top of 7 to make it make sense if it was going to come out in, 2 years or whatever. It would just be so crazy. But that's just me. I'm with you.
Could you see someone maybe who's maybe a horror director, like say like a Robert Eggers, who did The Witch and The Lighthouse, and now granted those are very different, but could you see someone who is a part of that ilk taking up the reins of a Scream movie?
I think specifically like people like Robert Eggers, like they have a vision, they have a style that is so unique to them. I think that it's hard, like you would have to find someone like Wes Craven, and that's the thing, like Wes Craven is Wes Craven, like nobody else exists like him. So I think that what would behoove the studio or Spyglass or whoever has the rights to the franchise whenever they do make this, that what they should be looking for in a director are the qualities that Wes Craven brought to the table. And I think that that's definitely comes down to being detail oriented, being character oriented, just not being afraid to challenge the script in a way, because I don't think that Radio Silence challenged their scripts at all. So I think that there's the possibility of asking questions, trusting your instincts, do something different. So I mean, if it comes down to finding a lesser known or an unknown director, that might be the key ingredient here. But I think that they just have to kind of vet people and get a really good understanding for what their vision is of the franchise. And I don't think that Spyglass really has that in mind. I don't think that most studios have that in mind of like thinking about that. They're more thinking about things on the financial end rather than artistically. I don't think that, at least if these specific writers are involved, I think that maybe this is where somewhere like Kevin Williamson could be a valuable asset to have as a producer, because he worked with Wes Craven. He remembers, being on set with him, the certain things that they would do. So, I mean, I think that they just need to find the right person and kind of not just pick whoever's popular or in, because I mean, the way that I understood it from how they described it on the commentary for Scream 5 is that Guy Busick and James Vanderbilt were just kind of given Scream. Like they kind of went in for a meeting with Spyglass after Spyglass kind of came back and they had purchased the rights to everything that the Weinsteins had owned in their bankruptcy sale. And they were just wanting to, get things going, get projects going. And they called these writers that they know, because Vanderbilt, had connections in the industry already. And they're like, take a look at what we got. What do you want? And they're just like, oh, we'll take Scream. And then from there, it was sort of like, who do we know? Who are our friends that you get? You know, Radio Silence came in, and I don't think I'm not saying that that's a bad way to do things, because I think that, you know, speaking of John Carpenter, the way that he made his movies in his heyday, he had all of the same people like Deborah Hill, Dean Cundey, Tommy Lee Wallace, like just the perfect team assembled to just make banger after banger after banger. So it is good to work with your friends and people that you know, but, you know, in some cases, if the quality of the product is not up to par, and it's more so just people kind of working against the clock, or whatever the studio's constraints are, like it's not going to be the best possible version of that it is. And I want to stress this, like, I don't think that either of the new Scream movies are bad movies, but I walk away from them just seeing like there was so much more potential, that they could have been really excellent, and it just wasn't there. So I think that definitely it's going to be a process. If it's not Christopher Landon, they just have to find the right person.
So outside of Scream, what are some films you've really loved that are more recent, within the last like 2 years or 3 years? Like, what has really gotten your attention right now?
Yeah, sure. In terms of horror, I think that in the last couple of years, Last Night in Soho was a phenomenal film. Very much like a classic giallo, supernatural ghost story, just kind of presented in just like the most artistic vision possible. X and Pearl, both from Ty West, Mia Goth, like those movies were my favorites of last year. And I'm super excited for Maxine to just kind of like be this trilogy capper of those movies. Outside of that, there hasn't really been, I mean, there's been great movies there. I haven't really enjoyed anything this year. It's been very hard for me. I've actually same. Okay, I'm glad I'm not alone, because I've come under a lot of fire for, you know, speaking out, and just how, you know, it's just like the horror genre has just not felt like it's been on fire the way that it has in the past. And that's just this year. I think that there was excellent movies in 2022, but I'll have people tell me like we're in a horror renaissance. This is the golden age of horror. And I just feel like, do you know what a renaissance is? But right. it definitely, there's an aspect of it that feels like the Emperor's New Clothes, where people are just kind of conditioned to see something that is average, that is mediocre. And this is just my opinion, that these movies are average, but then everyone is kind of like, this is the best that it gets. It doesn't get any better than this. Mm-hmm. And like I said, with Scream 5 and 6, it's just like, there's so much room for growth. I don't understand how people can just be so complacent when it comes to this genre that I love so much.
For real.
So that's, outside of like specific titles like X and Pearl and Last Night in Soho, which, I mean, granted, that might not be everyone's cup of tea. People might be listening to me and just being like, those movies suck. What are you talking about?
Right.
What do I know, you know?
Well, one that we kind of really enjoyed, I think it was this year. I don't know if you've seen it, but Skinamarink. It's now I can't even remember.
Was that this year or was that last year?
I cannot. I surely.
No, I think it was this year. It was this year.
Surely, yeah. Which is more of a. It's hard. Which I don't know if you've seen, Zach, but it's very much like a sensory experience rather than like a story. Did you see Skinamarink, by the way?
I did. Yes.
I'm gonna take that. So go ahead and tear it apart. Go ahead.
No, I wouldn't tear it apart, because I think that for what it is, that is a very unique idea. I think it would have been a wonderful 10, 15-minute short. But as a 100-minute long film, it's a lot. And I mean, I get that, okay, there's not a story that we're telling where we're stepping outside of this atmosphere, this environment. But, if there could have been something at least to move things along in a way that like kept my interest, because I was just sitting there miserable the entire time. Like I look at it and I think the way that sort of like the experience that was captured does feel very much like, the way that you remember when you were a young child and you would wake up at night and things would look that way. And as far as I understand, that's exactly what the writer-director had in mind. And in that, I think that he did a wonderful job. But it just, for the things that I like in a movie, I just cannot abide by 100 minutes of something that does not need to stretch out into 100 minutes. So it's a very polarizing movie in that regard, and I'm sure that the director understands that it's not for everyone, but for the I guess the aesthetic value that it adds, I think that it's it would be interesting to see concepts come out of that with that similar look.
What are some of your personal favorites outside of the horror genre, just throughout film history? What are some of your favorites?
I'm a huge fan of Jackie Brown, the Tarantino movie. I think that's his best movie. I always get so excited when I talk to people and they're like, yeah, that's his best movie, because it's one that people will not rank very highly or just like ignore for some of the more sensational ones. But I think just in terms of because he did not write it's based on a novel by Elmore Leonard. I just think that the way that he kind of took that concept and translated it to the screen was just brilliant. It's a long movie, it's a slow burn, but it just really pays off. I love seeing just characters be characters in a way that feels very authentic. And that's one of my favorites. Another one is The Letter, which is a Bette Davis movie from 1940. Very, very salacious for its time, I guess. The content was the movie starts off with her murdering her lover or murdering a man who we soon discover is her lover that she sent for, but she's trying to make it seem like he had attacked her, and that it just kind of delves into this whole game of manipulation of just these lies that she's weaving in order to get away with having killed him, and the evidence that proves that she is guilty is this letter that she wrote to him, summoning him to come see her. So there's this kind of it's a pretty dramatic movie for its time. And having said that, I love the fact that it does start off with such a kind of an incredible big moment, because I think a lot of movies that we see nowadays, and I was just talking about Skinamarink and just how it's so slow and bored me, is just that there's movies that don't really know how to flow in a way that keeps the pace going, and I love these sort of older movies, because Jackie Brown is possibly not really one of them, but just movies that introduce characters just in the moment, just in the middle of the action, rather than seeing the scene start or the scene end. For real. That it just makes things flow so much more. And another movie that's very much like that, which is just insane, is one called Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, which is from 1970.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is just it's Russ Meyer. It was written by Roger Ebert. It's a crazy movie about this rock and roll girl band who goes to Hollywood for the lead singer to get an inheritance, and then they end up hitting it big, almost immediately, and just become this whirlwind sensation. And it's just sort of the way that the Hollywood just sort of chews you up and spits you out, and just all this crazy shit that goes on in it. It's just a fun, interesting movie. So off the top of my head, those are some that I really appreciate.
Those are some great options.
Absolutely.
I'm glad that you both know what I'm talking about.
I think something too that has changed is because of what I guess you would call prestige television on Max, on Netflix, and we've seen a figure like Mike Flanagan kind of take horror and make it this sort of prestige drama, these 8 to 10 episode arcs, But could you see the Scream film universe translating to one story taking place maybe over an 8 episode arc?
Not that I couldn't see it, but I wouldn't want to.
Okay.
I like the idea of movies. I like the idea of going to movies and having a complete story from start to finish be told. I agree that I am not a fan, like you are, of these 3-hour opuses. I even 2.5 hours was that was a lot back then, and it just feels like every decade movies just get longer and longer. I really would like to see Oppenheimer, but I would not have seen it in the theater because that's just too much to ask for. I'd like to start seeing the return of the 90 or 100 minute long movies. So I'm sure that there are horror concepts that are conducive to the miniseries format. I don't think that Scream is necessarily one of them. I know that Chucky obviously that's in series format now. And it works to varying levels of success, but that's kind of been like in a way, like Chucky has always been sort of this like soap opera, because it is very consistent just in the storytelling from the first movie to where they're at now. And just with the structure of Scream, they kind of, I will say that in the series, I do recall them kind of having that meta discussion of just like a serialized horror movie as a television show. I don't remember exactly what it is. I'd only seen it once. So I couldn't tell you how it worked out. It's just in terms of like what they spoke to actually coming to fruition. But I also have not seen a lot of this Mike Flanagan, like Haunting of Bly Manor.
Hill House. Bly Manor, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I haven't seen any of them, so I couldn't really speak to it.
Yeah, and they are very, very good. We at least we enjoyed them. But yes, you're right. It's a different kind of story being told. And really, in a lot of ways, they have the dressings of horror, but really they're more of these emotional kind of family dramas, really.
Right.
That
yeah.
have these horror dressings on it. Now, something you bring up a lot in your videos too is you are a big fan of the Zodiac. You're very knowledgeable of the Zodiac. You did a great video where you kind of gave a Zodiac assignment to each one of the ghost faces. And if you had to assign a Zodiac to, say, the heroes of Scream, especially the core three, the Dewey, Sidney, and Gale, off the top of your head, what do you think they would fit under?
Thank you. Because I'm learning about zodiac signs like as I go. I'm not an authority on them as I am with like Scream or anything like that. So thank you. I appreciate that. But I don't know how well I know. I just kind of like, something I like to do is watch movies and just say, I wonder what they would be, and kind of like try to figure out a character as I go through. I think that would be a really fun like coffee table book of just like an encyclopedia of like what zodiac signs of different movie characters are. In terms of the Scream characters, Dewey is absolutely a Cancer.
I took the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad we're in agreement like that. Just very, very emotional, very much nurturing and caring for the people in his life that are important to him, but also kind of has that ability to get a little grouchy and passive aggressive. So I kind of felt that from him. Gale, it's hard to kind of like pin her down.
I was having trouble with her too.
For me, she's kind of like a blend of like a Leo and maybe a Scorpio, maybe, or something. Yeah.
I mean, I could see that. I think that definitely like fire energy. I might have leaned more towards Sagittarius, just because she's not afraid to just say whatever, and she's very much like kind of looking for the next scoop, the next adventure. She's constantly moving, and she's good at adapting through the situations that she is kind of thrust herself into. And Sydney, it could be different based on like which movie you're looking at it. I think she's a very consistent character, absolutely, but because she goes through such a transformation over the series, it's hard to say. I personally think Capricorn.
I see that.
She's just very serious. Like she just takes life very seriously, like a Capricorn would. Yeah. That's just kind of more so my read on her.
What's your sign?
I'm a Scorpio.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
How about you? How about you two?
We're both Pisces, and it's a lot of emotion over here. A lot of emotion.
Oh, good. A lot of emotion. Oh yeah.
Are there any movies, horror or otherwise, that are coming out soon that you are looking forward to?
I mean, like I said, Maxine. The third chapter of the X trilogy. I don't really know what else. I haven't been keeping up in the know of what's happening. So no, I could not tell you.
I mean, you said Maxine. You did. That was great.
Yeah.
That was great.
A question, because I got to shower some love on the Cherry Picker podcast as well. such a huge fan of both. Whenever we're just working around the house and stuff, it's usually yours and Eddie's voice in the background while we're working on projects or something. And how did you and Eddie meet? What's the story behind that? Because you two have a rapport that is just so infectious and fun, and I just love listening to the two of you, especially when you disagree about something. It's the most fun.
Oh, it's
fun thing to watch.
It's always more fun to disagree.
Because you guys are so different. Like you work so well together, but I can tell that you're just different. It's in a good way.
Well, thank you. I've actually never met him in person. He lives in Los Angeles. I'm in Calgary, and I initially met him through Instagram, or I don't even remember exactly because it was like 3 or 4 years ago now. Another friend of his would have has a podcast or has like a YouTube channel and would have Eddie on it, and they would discuss movies. And there was one where they were talking about Scream. And he, spoke to things that like made sense to me, or just like the way that I had seen the movie myself. Like in particular, in the first Scream movie, the first time he had ever seen it, his takeaway was that after the Drew Barrymore scene, it then segues to Neve Campbell. And his first thought was, oh, we're just going to do kind of like a vignette of just all of these maybe like 10 or 15 minute scenes going through the movie. It's just going to be like a new person getting murdered by this killer.
Interesting.
And that was just because the whole concept of like the opening of Scream was so jarring the first time you see it, because it's just like, oh, I thought Drew Barrymore was the star of the movie, and then for her to get killed, immediately I just figured, oh, okay, so that it's just going to continue going on like that. Obviously it didn't happen, but this is something that he had articulated that I had always thought but never really had put into my own words. So I just knew, okay, here's someone who has not only like interesting perspectives on the Scream franchise, but also someone that might like understand my voice as well. And I reached out to him and I asked if he would be interested in doing like commentary type things, because I had started my Patreon back then and I wanted to just have like content there. So that was kind of the origins of the Cherry Picker. We used to do these commentaries that were just exclusive for my Patreon supporters, and we would put a movie on and it would be on mute and we would watch it as we just talked through it. And we did a lot of those. I think we got up to 72, 73. And I had been kind of communicating with him for a while, because I'm just like, I would really like to kind of make this more widely available, or just to kind of do a thing where not just specific to Patreon. And I think there was just like the only thing was like really standing in my way was myself, and just maybe like fear of just talking, because I had already had my YouTube channel, and the energy that I put there is not exactly the same as it is that I'm giving to you right now, or that I would on a podcast. This is more casual. So I was always kind of fearful of that. And then once we just ripped the Band-Aid off, we started the Cherry Picker from episode 1. We did Scream, which was the beginning of when we were doing the commentaries. So we just kind of started over, and there was sort of an evolution that we would do a thing with the by the end of the episode where we would kind of have this debate or this poll of it started off as just kind of like a random question that we would make up. Like I can't remember the first one we did. It might have been like Halloween 4 or something. It's just like, are you team Kelly or team Rachel or something like that? And it wasn't really necessarily like relegated to one of our opinions or the others. We would just like throw random questions out there just to be interactive. And then at one point we covered the Friday the 13th, and it became who deserves to die the most. And it was a game where he would nominate someone and I would nominate someone, and the way that we would go weekly is just whoever won based on the votes that came in that week would then get the first nomination the next week. So when we did start the podcast as the Cherry Picker, that is essentially the Cherry Picker of nominating characters in horror movies that we want to see killed more than the other.
When I think of like the genre of YouTube horror, of horror YouTube or horror movie YouTube, I mean, really, your name really is up at the top of the pile, really. I would say there's you, there's Dead Meat, there's
Spooky Astronauts,
there's CZ's World, I think is the other one, and then there's obviously other prominent ones as well. But is there any sense of camaraderie in that genre amongst the creators, or even beefs, or is there any sort of overlap in that arena?
That's so interesting. Well, thank you for listing me with that like high regard, because I mean, like, those channels are so much bigger than mine. I don't know dead meat. Like I've never spoken to them. James or Chelsea, I've like never messaged them or vice versa. So I don't even know if they know I exist. I certainly know of them. I used to watch their content a lot, but I haven't in a while, in a few years. I don't really watch a lot of other YouTubers because I don't necessarily want to be influenced by other YouTubers. I do know CZ's, I've spoken to him or messaged him many times, and there are other horror YouTubers that have reached out to me. I don't think like any huge channels like in terms of like those two, but as far as beefs or anything, I don't know. Like I've heard like some people have beefs. I don't know anything about them. I just kind of like, I don't have any beefs with anyone. Like if someone has a beef with me, it's one-sided. I don't know anything about it. Because I don't have like a rivalry or anything that I could think of, unless it's just like me personally wanting to get farther ahead than them, but I have no sort of like agenda against anyone, if that's what you're asking.
Right.
We want you to tell all your deepest, darkest.
I mean, I wish.
No, I'm joking. You don't have to.
No. I wish I did have something more salacious to tell you. I'm very much like, I don't know if there's like a YouTube community of just like people like talking all the time. I'm not really part of it. Like I'm very much like an introverted person. I like my downtime. I haven't really been doing a lot of YouTube lately, just because I've been working on other projects. So it's one of those things that it comes and goes out of not necessarily out of my life, but just like in terms of what is immediately in front of me.
I guess as a follow-up to that, what are some of your most unpopular horror opinions that usually get the most outcry, I would say, from your fan base?
Right. Well, definitely like me saying that horror stinks right now was one of them. And I stand by it. It's a strong statement, but it's how I feel. And I probably could have, elaborated on it more, but I think that I've already done that. I just feel that, within talking in this episode with you, that I don't think that movies are really meeting the full potential, or probably movies in general, not just horror, of what they could be. And I don't think that has anything to do with the creatives per se. I think a lot of that has to do with the studio. That's why we're getting these writer strikes and actor strikes, because creatives are just not being respected by studios the way they should be. And if studios, took a step back and focused more on the art rather than the money that they make from it, we would have projects that would actually be given more time to breathe and develop to be the best possible versions of themselves. In terms of like other genres and stuff, I'm not a huge fan of the newer Halloween movies. I actually think that Halloween Ends is the best of the new trilogy. And I know that people think that that's the worst one. I just think it's the most interesting. I think it's the most like character driven and atmospheric of the three. But in terms of like the storytelling that they did with those movies, I was not a fan of. I think that I mentioned it already. I love Halloween 6. I love Halloween. I think it's a great like atmospheric ride. I think that it's the scariest that Michael is in the franchise. There's something about like just the way the movie looks and feels and sounds that is just, it's so unique and gruesome and violent. The story is bullshit. Absolutely. And I will not argue with anyone on that. But I love Halloween 5. I love how ridiculous and campy it is. Danielle Harris. I think that Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis in that movie is his best performance. Like he's just unhinged in that. And And I love Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. I think it's, besides the original, it's the best one. Yeah. I think that any of the ones that were the John Carpenter, Deborah Hill era of like the Tommy Lee Wallace, Dean Cundy, like those were just automatically the top tier.
Yeah, and I would say the fifth one has one of my favorite sequences in the whole franchise, when Michael has on the boyfriend's mask and she's in the car with him and she thinks it's her boyfriend the whole time, and she even kisses Michael. And kind of what I love about that is, even though she does die later, is she actually doesn't die in that kind of drawn out sequence where you're thinking, okay, any second now. Any second now. I kind of love that he lets her go. There is one moment in the 2018 Halloween that I did really like. I can remember it's kind of near the beginning. It's when Michael walks into that house and he kills the woman that's living there, and then he walks into the other room and there's a baby in a cradle crying.
Right.
And he pauses for a moment. And I remember in the theater thinking, if he kills that baby, I'm done.
Yeah.
If he kills that baby, I'm out. Like, why, and I love that it was that moment of he stops, he looks, and then he just keeps walking. And it's that feeling of knowing that if he wanted to, he could have. And I think that was something too about 5 in that sequence with the car. It was that feeling of like, well, if he wanted to, he could have, which almost is creepier that he just decided for whatever reason, not for me right now.
No, it is. I think like the characterization of Michael Myers is so inconsistent throughout that franchise, but I think that what David Gordon Green and them did bring to the new version of him that was very successful was that kind of character who could kill anyone. Like because I mean, before that in the movie, he killed like a 10 or 12-year-old. In the car, and the way that I had interpreted that of just like not killing the baby is just more so that not that it's not necessarily a challenge for him to kill the baby, but that the baby would not understand what was happening. The baby would not sense the fear of what Michael Myers is doing, whereas like the 12-year-old in the car would have. So it more so just comes down to like how did his victims perceive him?
Is Michael zodiacable? Does he have a sign, or is he just too blank to have a sign?
Well, technically, I believe his birthday is October 19th.
Right,
so
58 or 50, 56, I can't remember what.
1957.
Okay. So he's a Libra?
But yeah, like that would make him a Libra. I mean, that's also kind of cuspy. Because that's around my birthday. Like I'm on the cusp there.
Oh, nice.
So, he could kind of display Scorpio traits, like he does have the very like obsessive tendencies of like if we're looking at the first movie of just like Laurie Strode walks up to the front porch, like I'm just like my entire personality, not necessarily personality, but just like everything he does is now in regards to her and following her and just kind of like getting caught up in that. So, like potentially, I mean, like if you were looking at a Libra end of it, maybe just like the fact that Michael is like very playful and artistic with the way that he displays the dead bodies as he goes along. So, I mean, there's an argument to be made for either of them.
Yeah. Libras, if you're out there, we know you are setting up bodies out there. That's what you love to do. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing to talk to you. Yeah. It was so funny. We almost didn't even reach out because we were going to be like, he's going to not do it.
I'm glad you did.
I'm so glad we did.
Glad we did. Zach, where can people find you? You're obviously on YouTube and stuff. Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, you can go to YouTube. My main channel is Zack Cherry, Zackcherry. There's also the Cherry Picker, which has its own separate YouTube channel, but you can also listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all sorts of wherever it's streaming. I don't know all of them. I'm on Instagram at RetroBitchface, all one word, and Letterboxd, I guess, if you care to follow there. Also Zack Cherry.
Yes, nice. We need to get into Letterboxd. Zack Cherry, thank you so much for joining us here on Creep Street. I know our listeners are going to love this interview. It's certainly been a pleasure for us to have you on the show. We hope we get to speak with you again. We are such big fans, but once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Likewise, I had a great time. Thank you.
Wow. What an opportunity that was.
I know. I'm so glad that we were able to just really talk about all of that stuff, like really get in there and just, really dive deep into what we like, what we don't like, and why, things work and why they don't. It's just so interesting and makes me excited to go back and, rewatch some of these old classics.
Absolutely. Very well put, Maureen. Once again, you can find Zack Cherry on YouTube at Zack Cherry. That's Zack with a K. Please also check out the Cherry Picker podcast. Now, Maureen, How about we list off the names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers?
Let's do that, please.
Give it on up for the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish face Via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Vivacious Vicky McHugh, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the British Bonebreaker Bex Martin, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, and the Hellacious Cale Hoffman.
Big time thank you to all of you, our top tier Patreon subscribers. Thank you so much. You are giants in our eyes. Yes. And if you want to be like them, feel free to head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast for all sorts of bonus content. It's a good time over there.
Absolutely. And of course, one more time, a huge thank you to Zack Cherry. We are such huge fans.
Please remember to like, rate, subscribe, comment, share us on social media, all of those things. We see it and we so appreciate it.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
I'm Maureen Bogey.
Good night and goodbye.
Goodbye.